Okay, it's just about 11:15 in the morning, and we'll be together for half an hour with Ron Siegel, who you may see on the screen, and Emily Porter, who's there to be a support person for you all if you'd like to go to the chat line, ask any questions. Also, for those of you who would like it, this is closed caption. If you go to the live transcription box in the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'd like to read the words as well as hear them, live transcription is possible. So I'm Michael with Leading Edge. There's Ron Siegel. We're going to be together, hopefully with some of you in Cancun on a nice February week, February 14th to 18th, with this brand new program that we've never done before. Uh, bring great people like Ron to Cancun for workshops with a lot of other opportunities for connections and fun in February. Um, so these meet and greets are really to give you an opportunity to hear from Ron about what that week is going to be like. I'll also talk about some of the other features of our week, and then open for any questions that you possibly have about Ron's program, about what we're doing down there, about the hotel, or anything else that you would like to learn about. So first, I'd like to welcome Ron. And Ron, I know you were one of the first people I talked to about doing this week in Cancun. So why don't you just let people know a little bit about your program? I know it's on the website, but it's nice to hear from you directly.
Sure. So this is going to be a week to explore forgiveness and particularly to explore how mindfulness and compassion practices can be used to help us forgive when it's appropriate to forgive. So why talk about forgiveness? Well, it turns out that almost all of us have resentments from times that we feel like we've been mistreated or have been exposed to injustice that we harbor. And all you have to do is take a moment now, and I'll actually invite you to just close your eyes for a second and think, is there anybody in my life that in some way harmed me that maybe I still have some leftover feelings about? And it usually doesn't take long to realize that, yeah, well, there's actually usually a bit of a list. Some of us have a longer list than others, and you can open your eyes again, and for some, they're stronger than others. But if we think about our caseloads and we think about folks who have been, particularly folks who have been through trauma or have been badly injured in their life, and that can be trauma that comes from complex trauma that occurred over a period of time with many smaller insults, if you will, or it can be trauma related to being part of a marginalized group, trauma being related to a cultural group that in some way, whatever environment they're in, was mistreated. There are so many variations on this in which people harbor resentment. And what we do when we're harboring resentment is we actually wind up harming ourselves. There's just an enormous literature that talks about the mental health problems that come from this, how it contributes to anxiety and depression, mostly by keeping us in this state of sympathetic arousal. As well as interpersonal problems, because it obviously makes it quite difficult to reconnect to people or to connect to people that remind us of the person who hurt us, and a whole host of physical ailments. There's a tremendous literature that shows that when people are holding on to resentment, basically the body breaks down more. The phrase that I love about this is holding on to resentment is like setting oneself on fire and expecting the other person to be disturbed by the smoke. It's as though somehow if we hold on to this, it's going to protect us or harm the other, but it winds up harming ourselves. So what we're going to do in the workshop is really look at this process. Why is it that we hold on to resentments and why it's hard to forgive? It turns out that it's quite hardwired. We have a justice instinct in ourselves. And in fact, other social species have a similar instinct. It's fascinating to see where this comes from and why it's so automatic and why it's so powerful. And then how can we decide when or not we're ready to forgive, because doing this prematurely, doing a kind of spiritual bypass, that doesn't work out very well. We wind up just actually seething inside while we're telling ourselves that we've forgiven the other. And sometimes we need to hold on to the anger or the resentment because it moves us, to move towards social justice, or it moves us to protect ourselves from a dangerous other. So it's actually a very complex field, but a fascinating one, and one in which, when we learn how to practice mindfulness and compassion, it can help us in the process of walking the forgiveness path. So over the course of the week, the lovely thing is that we're going to be together for 3 hours each morning, and we'll do a fair amount of practices as well as look at the challenges of forgiveness conceptually. We'll do a fair amount of mindfulness and compassion practices, and having done the structure before of sort of 3 hours in the morning and then having the rest of the day free in a nice natural environment, it's really quite lovely, because there's nothing like practicing a lot of mindfulness to be able to be more present for the beach and the waves and the food and the experience of unwinding and rejuvenating ourselves. The basic structure of the week will be, we'll do 2 days of some practice and digging into this conceptually, looking at it clinically, looking at cases. And then in the middle, on Wednesday, we'll just practice for those 3 hours. We'll do a combination of mindfulness, compassion, and forgiveness practices to really have the personal transformative experience. And then we'll work on integrating that more during Thursday and Friday, again, as we continue to mix understanding this conceptually, looking at the practical clinical applications, and also learning and doing practices. So that's it in a nutshell, what at least what my plan is.
Okay. Well, you've covered a lot, and everyone will have the opportunity to ask you any questions to clarify anything about what the workshop program is going to be and how it's going to go. And I know you've probably had more experience leading retreats and programs like this than anyone else I know. So generally, what's your experience like when
It's a
you've
one
led these kind of programs?
Yeah, it's a wonderful model. I mean, that's why I was excited that you were that you were coming up with this and wanted to include me. I've done them quite a bit in Cape Cod and Florida, in other places, and especially if the program, as this one is, includes personal practice, includes practices that are personally somewhat transformative for us. Oftentimes in our life, we'll do some kind of practice, a mindfulness or a compassion practice or a forgiveness practice, and then we're thrust into our busy day and we're thrust into all the stressors of a busy day. There's something really nice about having exposure to ideas and experiences, and then having open space to integrate that. Now, many of you will probably come with family or friends, and you'll have social interactions, but there will still probably be opportunities for being. And mindfulness practices in particular are just very well suited to natural environments, because when we're out in nature, at the seashore in this case, we're not in nonstop interpersonal interaction, and the open space gives us time to process and be with whatever arises during the practices, and actually allows us to savor experiences more, rather than being caught in our thought stream or being so involved in what's happening on our smartphone. We're actually able to breathe and be, and it becomes very, very rejuvenating. So for me, when I'm leading these programs, I always end the week with a sense of being more present, being more open, being actually more in touch with the full range of my emotions, including vulnerabilities. And it feels in that way quite renewing. So I really appreciate the kind of structure of, several hours together and then a lot of open space in nature.
Yeah. Well, speaking of renewing, and I'd like to say a few things about how I chose this place and what the week will look like. Because I realize the core is the workshop itself. People can learn a lot, get their continuing education credits, whether U.S. or Canada, and have some write-off possibilities. But really, where is it going to be, and what's it going to be like to be there for a week? The program is 5 days, but I think most people want to go for a week. If you're like me in Canada, a week away in February sounds very, very it's almost like a necessity. So first, the place we chose, which is now called the Dreams Resort and Spa, uh, had great reviews on TripAdvisor because I wasn't going to go any place I didn't have confidence in, and the reviews were so good. It previously had another name uh, by the same resort company, and they bumped it up another level to a higher star rating. So it should be even better than the reviews that people gave it in TripAdvisor, which was an average of like 4.5 stars. And then I looked at some videos of people who had been there last year, and they recorded what their room was like and what the meals were like. And it made me quite confident that this is a really good, well-run place. They also have very good COVID policies. All this is available on our website, on their website. And then, I'm very aware that what's the rest of the week look like and how can we make it optimal for people who want to connect, to be with others and have a great experience outside the workshop. So for one thing, Terry Real's going to be in another room leading a workshop. Terry and Ron are friends. They're both from the Boston area. And on the Wednesday night of each of our weeks, we get our speakers together to kind of do a general talk for both groups who are attending. Thought that would be really a kind of interesting, fun thing to do, as well as making yoga available every morning. And then we've invited each week what we call a very interesting person. And Ron, the week you're there, we've invited Lynn Noel, who is also from the Boston area. And she's a storyteller and musician. She's written books and made presentation on women explorers. And Lynn will be there to make a couple of presentations. And then just for those who want to kind of learn more from her about the things that she's been interested in. I think she's head of the New England Folk Institute as well. So that's another opportunity. And finally, we thought, well, people are coming down on their own or even with family or friends. Let's have every day a spot for a kind of happy hour meet and mingle. So before dinner, people want to get together and hang out. It's just another way to make the week just more interesting and more fun in a beautiful place. So those are some of the things we wanted to do when we thought about how can we make this week just really special and a great getaway. So that's some of the additional information about what we're doing. So I'd like to open it up. If anyone has any questions, there's a couple of ways you can ask. Number one, you can go to the chat box and just say, I have a question, or you can use the Zoom screen hand raising function, or if you want to do the old fashioned thing, go like that. Emily will be looking for anyone who would like to participate and ask Ron or me any questions that would help you understand what we're doing a little bit better. So I'll open that now.
Yeah,
See if,
and I'll just mention
yeah,
while we're waiting for that that Terry's
yeah.
not only a friend, but his work and mine are very complementary
Oh,
to one another because Terry works a lot with issues of narcissism and toxic masculinity, and it's just so interesting to see how often when we're having trouble forgiving, what's happened is basically our feelings have been hurt about whether we're respected or not, whether we're heard or not. Very often it has to do with our self-image, our self-esteem having been injured in some kind of way. So I'm really looking forward to Terry and to dialoguing with all of you, but with Terry as well. There, exploring some of these ideas on the Wednesday night meeting.
thanks. Yeah. Okay. Would anyone like to make a comment or ask a question about anything about Ron's program or about what we're doing or anything else that you're interested in asking?
I have a way to help. You can think of raising your hand and commenting or questioning as an act of generosity because there are probably other people in the group with a similar thought and who are just hesitant to to want to speak. So, would anybody like to be generous to the rest of the group by sharing what's on their mind?
Well, I see some thoughtful faces out there. Thank you for those of you on the screen. And anyone else who's, certainly we always like to see faces if you feel, even if you don't even have a question, if you like to allow your screen.
Sh- sh- shall I maybe talk a little bit more about forgiveness while
Sure.
people are
Sure.
so
Why don't you do that? That would
yeah,
be
so
helpful. And how it's used in practice and,
yeah.
and how you've seen the growth in the use of forgiveness in clinical practice. I'd be interested in that.
It's so interesting. There are so many things that make us hesitant to forgive because sometimes, for example, we are not ready to reconcile. In other words, and it may not be wise to reconcile. In other words, forgiveness is not necessarily about renewing a relationship because it could be that this other person, we have a reasonable judgment that says it's not a good idea to stay in a relationship to the other. But the way that it starts to work practically is it actually frees us from holding on to the resentment. Very often, what's happening is for our clients and perhaps for ourselves, is we're holding on to the resentment as a kind of protection because while we're angry, we're not feeling the hurt so much. And the process of forgiveness almost always involves opening to the hurt, opening to the fact that first that we've been hurt and actually being able to tolerate the fact that we've been hurt. So when a person makes this move to begin to forgive, it is usually part of a much larger therapeutic project. It's not just about okay, I'm over it, what went wrong in this relationship, but rather it's an opportunity to become more at home with the fact that my feelings have been hurt. And all of us, are brokenhearted. We carry such a long history of all of the different times that other people have disappointed us, all the different times where we maybe felt rejected or disrespected or not heard, and this kind of thing. So actually, the project of forgiveness for our clients and for ourselves becomes a process of opening to this whole realm of inner thought and feeling and vulnerability, and as such, it starts to become part of a much broader healing project. It's so interesting. One of the things that we'll talk about in the workshop, I happen to also be involved a lot in the world of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, in which we're seeing things like PTSD that was previously intractable being resolved. And the path to resolution is almost always about this increased capacity to be with our vulnerability. And mindfulness and compassion practices turn out to be great tools for that because mindfulness practices allow us to be able to stay with pain. I mean, people think, oh, mindfulness, that's about stress reduction. Yes, that is one of the effects of mindfulness, but it's not its most interesting. Its most interesting is increasing our capacity to bear pain, to bear sadness, to bear anger, to bear fear. And so when we start to use these mindfulness practices, we see how we can tailor them to specifically deal with the pain of having been hurt by somebody. Because if we can't be with the pain, then we have to hang on to the anger to protect us um, against the hurt. Compassion practices become very interesting here because they start as being compassion practices toward oneself, right? Because if we have a way when we're dealing with our hurt to be able to hold that hurt, to actually not be overwhelmed by it because we're able to care for ourselves as a parent would care for a child, that kind of self-compassion practice, that gives us an enormous amount of courage and flexibility to be able to not only open to hurt but open to new circumstances where we might get hurt again. So there are, so this forgiveness path is a path that opens up into really a radical transformation of how we can go through life and how we can enter into other relationships. And what we'll do in the workshop is we'll look at this in concrete clinical examples, of the person who has kind of gone numb and walled themselves off from their tenderness and their vulnerability as they hold on to their resentment about those bad other people that did these things to them, and what it would take for them to feel safe enough to be able to relax that and open into to what's underneath, as well as the person who is, desperately clinging to relationships because they're so afraid of the hurt um, that's that's underneath, and they're terribly afraid of any kind of aloneness. So this has many different applications for a wide range of clients.
Thank you. We have had a couple chat questions come in. The first is, would you explain a little more about it being protective? I think you touched on that a little bit in your last
Yeah.
explanation, but could you touch on that a little more?
Yeah, and, in Buddhist circles, they talk about forgiveness as having a honeyed tip and a poisoned. I'm sorry, they talk about resentment as having a honeyed tip and a poisoned root. And Brene Brown, who many of you probably know because she's done such a nice job of helping to normalize vulnerability, says resentment goes down like a milkshake, but eats you up like battery acid. The it feels good because in a moment of resentment, we can be right, right? We can be the good one while the other is the bad one. And when we're actually feeling angry, we don't feel frightened and we don't feel sad and we don't feel hurt. And you can check this out in your own experience. We'll be doing these exercises during the workshop of generating some anger and noticing what happens to these other affects when we're angry. So it's very protective, and it can be protective in a practical and important way if I'm in an abusive relationship and I can connect with my anger. That can get me out to move, to get out of the relationship and to protect myself quite literally from the abuse of others. So that, it operates on a practical external level, but it also operates on an intrapsychic level in which simply feeling the anger and staying with it and renewing the anger with my these things are called grievance narratives, the stories we tell ourselves over and over and over again. In these moments, it raises us up, puts the other down, and protects us from the hurt. So those are some of the ways it's protective, both internally and externally. So part of the trick of this, of course, is, in therapy, we never want to encourage somebody to let go of a defense before they're ready. So we have to really look at, will this person have the resources to be able to work with what's underneath the anger if they're to relinquish the anger. And we'll talk about, how to work with that psychoeducationally and how to assess that collaboratively with our clients.
Thank you. Our next question is, don't you see a lot of resentment in the current political situation, and that this is part of a displacement of resentment at a more personal level?
Yeah, well, it's sort of both. It's absolutely this happens that people's own hurt. I mean, if we look broadly at the large swaths of the population that really do feel quite disenfranchised, in America anyway, there are lots of folks who they saw their often their dad. I'm dating myself somewhat, but you can see I'm an old guy anyway. But where they saw their dad able to support the family without a college education, with a good factory job, and they could have a car in the garage, a house, and even go on vacation sometimes. And now they see their peers, if their peers are similarly don't have the privilege of an advanced education, and they don't have a skilled trade, really struggling just to get by, and absolutely can't support a family. So they're sort of the resentments that come out of this, out of the life circumstance, which feed into in which the political anger covers for the fact that personally it feels so humiliating and so degrading to be in this circumstance. But other times it's other kinds of hurts that have happened, things that have happened in our life. We tend to relate to political leaders with transferences not unlike those that we have toward teachers and the others. That whatever our issues are with parents can get played out with political leaders. And this whole process of othering, one of the things we'll really dig into here in forgiveness, wonderful line by William Wadsworth Longfellow, the American writer, that says, if we could see the secret history of our enemies, the secret history of our enemies, we would discover pain and sorrow sufficient to disarm all hostility. That what happens, and we really see this in the political arena, when we're othering the other, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, the other is seen as somehow simply bad, and we don't see the other as suffering in some way. And it's fascinating the way this can shift when we start to see the other as somehow they're doing what they're doing out of their suffering. This is a little tangential to the first question, but it branches out from there, where instead of where we can actually use these practices to start to see why the person who injured us, like what was going on for them, what are the factors and forces that led to that. And that can be a very interesting way to begin to work with the personal hurts that indeed get projected on into the political arena.
Yeah. I think we have time for maybe one more question if anyone feels like asking it.
Or comments or your own reflections on your own experience of forgiveness or holding on to resentment.
Well, if not, I think this, thank you for sharing wisdom and your thoughts. I mean, I think they mean a lot to all of us. In closing, I want to say a few things. If you're interested in hearing what Ron is doing and all the things we're doing in Cancun, and getting away in February seems to make sense, and you consider this as an option, as a great way to spend a week with Ron or other people, our website is there, and it's full of all kinds of information, both about all our speakers, what they're going to be presenting, as well as the hotel, because we are giving the opportunity to book your rooms on the website, really to make it really easy. It's an all-inclusive hotel, which means that price includes everything: your food, your drinks, your happy hours, all that stuff. And we decided that since you've shown interest in joining Ron, we're going to offer a $100 discount for Ron's workshop in Cancun, or any of our other programs that are on the Cancun site. So we'll send a code about that. And if you're curious about Cancun and want to meet other people, next week we're going to have Janina Fisher and then Frank Anderson, also in Ron's neighborhood. Well, Janina used to be, now she's in California. So they're going to be on the screen to talk about what they'll be doing in Cancun. So feel free to check it out. And I know some of you on the screen, longtime leading edge people, and some I don't. So I certainly look forward to seeing you in a beautiful place in February. In the coming months. So we'll send you out that email, because we're sending out this email to all the people who've signed up for today. And a lot of you seeing this might be seeing it as a video, because you're not actually here live, but wanted to have access to hear what Ron has to say and to hear about the Cancun program as well. So thank you once again for joining us, and stay in touch, stay warm, and appreciate you being here. Thank you, Ron, very much. Ron, last word to you.
Well, just thank you, Michael. Thank you, Emily, for organizing this, and thank you all who are here on the call for your interest. I hope that you'll be able to join us.